A couple of weeks ago, Behringer released and then quickly unreleased their Vintage VST synth. It's now actually on general release, so we're going to look at the proper full version of it that's available for free. Now, if you've watched this channel a lot, you'll probably know that I normally say free is the best price and makes a lot of things worthwhile, but I'm not sure that's the case here. So let's take a look and see if you agree with me. So here we are. We can see the web page for Behringer's Vintage. It's all looking very rendered and 3D and impressive. It's pretty straightforward to follow what you need. You need to click the Get Free license and click a couple of boxes, and then you can download for Windows or for Mac. It's available in modern formats, so you'll be able to use it no matter what. Installer is pretty straightforward. Same old thing. You can just pick your formats, AU and VST and standalone, which is a nice option to have. We'll take a brief look at that to get it set up. Installation is pretty similar on the PC as well. And first time you run it as standalone, you will need to authorize it. Same would go if you just run it as a plugin, but you can see you just need to put in your email address, which you've registered with, and the license key that they send you. Once you've got that in there, you will be good to go. So if you're using it in standalone mode, there's a configuration option you'll need to take care of. Otherwise, you won't be able to play it from an external MIDI keyboard. So you can see here, got the audio, but importantly, the active MIDI inputs don't seem to be ticked. This seems to be a fashion for standalone devices. Here you can see I've plugged in the MPK Mini Mark III, and then I just need to tick it, and then I'll be able to play it from there. So you'll probably find a similar thing. If you've got a MIDI keyboard connected, then you'll need to do that. You can also set the latency from here, so the lower you go, the better you will be, but of course that can come with a trade-off in terms of CPU use. And in my testing, the Vintage is pretty high on CPU use actually for what it is, so you might need to steer a bit clear of that and possibly keep an eye on what it's using when it's in a DAW. Another thing I've noticed is when you shift between programs, it's got the icon saying Synth Suite. So that kind of shows that maybe there's something else coming down the pipeline. Certainly you'd expect that from Behringer. It's unusual that they just have a one-off product. Normally they will have a whole suite of them in the same way they have with their hardware clones of classic vintage synths. So here we have the Vintage in Cubase. And as you can see, the interface is the same as when it's in standalone mode. We're just going to take a quick tour. So in short, any section you have highlighted, so you click on it here, then becomes active in the screen in the middle. If it's turned off, then it will be dark. If it's turned on, then it will be lighter. But you get extra controls. So you don't just get a rate control and whether it's tempo synced or in hertz, but you also get all these other controls here. So you can pick waveform, retriggering, phase of the LFO in this case, delay, etc. So there's always more to be done here than there is there. I think this ends up making it slightly harder to see what's going on. Personally, I think I'd probably have preferred more controls visible all the time, because here you just think, well, this is the only thing on the LFO, and actually other things can be going on. So when you're trying to do something with a patch, it's a little more complicated because you can't just see at a glance what's going on. I appreciate you probably couldn't have all these controls on here, but there's a lot of real estate here which is being used up that potentially could have been used in another way with more knobs. Talking of knobs, if you want to reset them, if you double click them, so here we're 3 octaves down, if you double click it, it goes back to the beginning, but notice that the pop-up has not changed. It still says -3. I'm sure that'll be fixed at some point, but at the moment it's slightly confusing. And then if I go off it and go back, it's now reflecting the true value. So that's one of the number of bugs which I think I've discovered in here. Again, we've got more controls here. We've got a spelling mistake, plus width instead of pulse width, etc. So you've got all of the standard kind of stuff you would expect from a synth is available here. Filter, plenty of controls here. We've got all these which we can use, and we've got an individual envelope for each one. So we've got linear or exponential. So basically exponential will curve and get to the end result, whereas linear will just move in a linear manner. Often exponential is what you want, but not always. So you'll be able to play around with that. So there are plenty of facilities here, far too many for me to cover in what I think should be a brief review for reasons which will become apparent later on. Amplifier again, and notice that you've got an individual ADSR for each filter, which is nice. That makes a change. And then you've got your VCAs here as well, and they are individual as well. So you've got lots of control here. There's plenty you can do with the settings in here, and say I'm not going to go through every single one. Most of them are fairly straightforward. The manual isn't particularly explicit, so if you don't know what you're doing, wiggle with the controls. But the manual isn't going to be an enormous amount of help. It's basically just saying what the control is with half a sentence, and that's pretty much it. Filtering wise, we've got low pass, band pass, and formant, and that stands for formant control. So that's a filter profile which should match formants, etc. So yeah, it's interesting to have these options here. We've got plenty to go through in here, and I'm not going to go through all of it, because what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick listen to a couple of the sounds. So as promised, looking at a couple of presets. So the thing I found with this, although there are quite a few of them, there's best part of 100 there, is it? Something like that. They generally, with a synth, you think if you've got some power there, you're going to show it off in the presets, and you can just stumble across things while you're just randomly playing around, which would sound decent, that then could be, fine-tuned and made into presets. I'm assuming there are competent people programming this. They're just underwhelming. I'm not going to go through many of them because they are underwhelming. The default one, which it's normally on, is this one. So I think when you start it up, you get this, which kind of sounds like some weird, Dolby Digital audio ident from the late 90s or something. It's got loads of bass, but it's just underwhelming. The only two that I found, which I remember their name because I thought, yeah, that was all right. One of them was, where is it now? Raver Conspiracy. So probably only like that because I spent too much of my time in the 90s in fields. And the other one, I think, where was it? Cheeky Tripper. Again, sounded like a synth I used a lot in the 90s. Yeah, so, there's a bit of interest in there, but it's nothing special, is it? This is like generic. Yeah, I mean, obviously, get it and download it and listen to it yourself, but it's not great. And the thing I've noticed with this as well is it's, I'm on a reasonably powerful M1 Max MacBook here, and look at the CPU load. Like just playing that, I'm playing 4 notes there, and it's peaking at like 15% CPU usage. That is not good. So the default preset is this BR Resolutor one, and it's a bit of a nothing kind of sound. It's got an awful lot of bottom end on it. But it's like many of the other presets, it's not particularly interesting. If I was programming a synth, I think I would put my best, most impressive sound up front and center. That doesn't seem to be the case here. But let's take a look at why I'm not impressed with this in detail. So what I've done is I've created an initial preset. So here it is. And in this, I've basically turned all this off. So this, although this says this is on, the oscillator's off, the amps off, etc. This isn't doing anything. We've just got this top row here. The LFO isn't doing anything. We've just got an oscillator at this point doing a sawtooth. And then the filter is doing nothing because the cutoff's all the way up, resonance is all the way down. And then the amp, let's just set that. So this is pretty much on and off now. So when I play this sawtooth, I can play it. We get that. Just get a pretty straightforward sawtooth. It's got a bit of a curve on there, which is generally a good thing. But let's compare it to another synth. So this is the Town Noisemaker. So here on the Town Noisemaker, we've got a similar patch set up. So filter's not doing anything, and we've just got one oscillator, which is on a sawtooth. And you can hear it's pretty similar. It's going down, the other one goes up. It's basically phase reverse. There's nothing particularly interesting to see there. But they sound similar, other than the fact that the towel was an octave out. But it's coming to the square wave is where things get a little bit more revealing, I think. So if we change to square wave here, we can see the vintage one is just a mathematical square wave. It's really, kind of on or off. Whereas the square wave on the noisemaker, you can see has got some angles here. So it's not a square wave. This is much more like a traditional subtractive analog synth. And if we go down an octave, I think it's got a bit more personality than it just sounds a little more interesting. The vintage one sounds a bit hollow. So that's the first thing. I don't think the oscillators are quite as good, but the filter is where it really comes into play. So if we set this to about 1K, because that's as close as we're going to get, you can't set it perfectly, but pretty close to 1K, and put the resonance to 50%, and we're on a 24 dB filter. If we listen to that on the vintage, it sounds filtered, it sounds a bit dull, it doesn't sound great. Now, let's see the same on the noisemaker. It's got a bit more personality to it. So compare the two. We're not seeing those resonances here, whereas on the noisemaker, there's much more happening. And if we swap to Sawtooth, we get some personality in there, whereas with the vintage, it's just not the same. So I think the filter is really what's letting the side down, because the towel one, whereas if we play the same thing on there, it's just not got that. And filters are what make most synths stand out of this ilk. So if the filters aren't there, the rest of it isn't going to cut it. So while it gives you loads of options and lots of different things you can see, it's just not cutting it because of that, as far as I'm concerned. So although we've got all these controls and we've got all this ability to change everything and, more modulation than you've got in something like the noisemaker, because the basics aren't there, the oscillators, the square wave oscillator just isn't quite there. Sawtooth pretty much is. That's slightly different. The filters of the Behringer let it down. So go and choose something else. The Surge is a much better option. So if you get Surge XT, it sounds much, much better. In fact, let's load one up. So let's just change this track here. Let's get rid of the noisemaker. And let's just load up Surge. If you're not aware of Surge, it's a great synth. It's free. It's a development of something which wasn't free originally. It's a fantastic synth. So just on the init saw patch, it already sounds better. And again, look at that sawtooth. It's a different thing again. It's this sort of exponential curve. And there are videos on the channel. I never finished off because the modulation section changed, and I've been rather busy since. But this is a fantastic synth. So even if you just go through the presets, of which there are loads, I mean, it's just insane how many presets there are, but they're all inspirational song starter type of things, and that's what you want. So even just on this saw patch, so we can put a low pass filter on 24 dB, put 50% of resonance in there, and it's already more interesting again. So similar settings, compare that with boring. Somehow that's more interesting. I think I've made my point. In terms of automation, the Vintage is well appointed. So this is nice. This is always good to see. So you can see pretty much looks like every control that's available. So all of those ones from the center display are all available as automation targets, including macros as well. So there's 4 macro controllers at the top. This is good to see. So I always like that. But does that save it? Not sure about that. In terms of MIDI modulation, this is reasonably well appointed. So you can just click the MIDI remote here, and then any of these controls which are highlighted can then be controlled. So if we click cut off, that's ready to take MIDI control, and then I'll change this control, and you can see on screen that's now controlling that. If you want to do another one, click the next control, move the next one on screen, but make sure you don't start playing around with this one. You need to take it out of learn mode. Whatever the last control was you clicked, that will be the one that will be altered. So we'll do this, and then we'll just do level to round out with the 4 controls. And then if I want to start moving these, I take it out of learn mode. And now you'll see on screen, I can move multiple controls at the same time. And that's all been learned and remembered. Straightforward. So there you go. That's my take on Behringer's Vintage synth. Now, you're probably aware if you've watched the video that I'm not that keen on it. And the main reason I'm not that keen on it is because of the sound. Ultimately, for me, it doesn't sound that good. It sounds like the kind of boring synths I used to have in my studio, which were cheap, and every preset you went through kind of sounded the same. What I want from a synth is inspirational sound, even if it's just from a basic square wave with a bit of a filter on there. But often, synths live and die by their presets, and it hasn't really got any good ones. There's nothing in there where I go, that's a song waiting to happen. That's inspirational. And to say that's what I want from a synth. I think your time would be better spent with Surge or the Town Noisemaker or a variety of other synths which aren't in the pretending to be a subtractive synthesizer kind of field. So there's lots of options. I would say don't spend your time on this. There's a lot of people who don't like Behringer. There's 2 reasons for this. There's always been people who are snooty about them in terms of the quality of their product, but also there's some other issues which I think we probably do need to look at. But in terms of the quality of their product, I've never felt aggrieved by them because it's always been cheap enough that you think, yeah, that's okay. I made my living in the early 2000s doing quite a lot of mobile recording on a large scale, and I used a Behringer DDX3216 digital mixer with all the extra I/O to achieve this. It was much cheaper than any of the alternatives at the time. It sounded okay. It wasn't amazing, but I think it was about a quarter of the price of the other options, and I just didn't have the money to do that. It worked perfectly well. There were a couple of little bugs. It was built reasonably well. Lived in a flight case. Never really had a problem with it once I'd found my way around the bugs and the button not to press that would lock the mixer up. The same goes for all their other hardware I've had. I've had loads of their DI boxes. They're fairly cheap. They're a bit flimsy. You wouldn't want to tread on them too many times, but they're okay for the money. I think the same goes for their audio interfaces. There's 2 of them here. They're okay. They work reasonably well. Every time I plug them in, they just work. They don't sound incredible, but they don't sound terrible either. And for the right money, they're okay. The flip side of that is Behringer seems to have become this company which doesn't respect people's intellectual property and thinks it can do what it wants. They've made quite a lot of copies of classic analog synths, and there's an argument where you think, well, no one else is making them, so, that's okay. But they've also been making copies of more recent stuff and basically just using other people's creations as their research and development. And that I don't think is okay for sure. But on top of that, when people have been vocal in their criticism of the company, they seem to have gone after the people rather than the criticism. And I don't think that's okay, particularly when you are a large company and you're potentially making personal, sometimes some quite dodgy attacks on individuals and their characteristics rather than what they've got to say. The details of that I'm going to leave for you to research, but there's certainly been some shady behaviour on their part. But that's not why I don't like this synth. I don't like this synth because I don't think it sounds great, and I think there's much better free alternatives. If you're concerned that charities are going to miss out on the money as a result of this, then just donate to a charity that you think is worthwhile. There are plenty of causes out in the world which need your money. If you have any money to spare, even if it's just a few pounds or whatever, then you can find somewhere to do that. It will be a better world for doing that, providing you give in the right way. So with that slightly off topic, not rant. Anyway, with that out of the way, as ever, I hope you found this video useful. And if you have, please comment, like, and possibly even subscribe. And we'll see you again soon for more Music Tech Tuition.